Good afternoon, everyone. This is a very special occasion for us to come together around a piece of legislation that strikes to the heart of our families in our country. I'm pleased to be here with Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer, Ranking Member Conyers of the Judiciary Committee, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, the author of the Violence Against Women Act, and Congresswoman Louise Slaughter. We'll hear from them. Congresswoman Slaughter was one of the original co-sponsors when we passed the bill way back when originally, and also to be joined by so many of my colleagues from the House at a time when the House has adjourned and they're still here. This is very important to us. On Monday, Americans heard our president issue a clarion call to action to live up to the highest ideals of equality and opportunity, to make real the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Today, House Democratic leaders are here to fulfill that promise to protect the lives and secure the liberty and happiness of America's women and families by reauthorizing and strengthening the Violence Against Women Act. For nearly 2 decades, the Violence Against Women Act has helped ensure that no victim of domestic violence has to suffer in silence or in the shadows. Its passage, led by then-Senator Joe Biden, at the time the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, was a watershed moment for history, in our history. And in the years since, we've come together in a bipartisan way to reauthorize and expand the reach of this law. Now we must do it again. The last Congress had the opportunity to take this action. The Senate passed a strong bill with a bipartisan vote of 68 to 31. 68 to 31. Yet House Republicans refused to bring the Senate's bipartisan bill to the floor, leaving millions without a critical line of defense against domestic violence. This Congress has a chance to correct the mistake without further delay. Today, with 158 co-sponsors and counting, that's in the House, including every woman Democrat in the House, Democrats are reintroducing the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, which would strengthen existing protections, expand protections to LGBT Americans, immigrants, and Native Americans. This bill already has bipartisan support in the Senate already, including from key Republican women senators. So it's already bipartisan there. It is time for their House Republican colleagues to follow suit and join the Senate in a bipartisan backing of this measure. Failure to enact this bill would deprive women and children of vital protection against abuse and law enforcement of essential tools to combat domestic violence. We must act now. After almost 2 decades of success, the facts are clear. The Violence Against Women Act works. It has saved lives, has made women and children and their families safer, and this year we will build on that history of progress. With that, I'm very pleased to yield with the distinguished champion on this issue for many years, in fact, decades, Steny Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Leader Pelosi, and thank you for your leadership. I am very pleased to join Gwen Moore and one of the few males that is standing here with all these wonderful members of Congress who are women. Chairman Conyers. I'm proud to join in reintroducing the Violence Against Women Act in the 113th Congress. This is on the premise that although we had an opportunity in the 112th Congress, and as the leader has pointed out, in a bipartisan fashion the Senate acted, we failed to act. But it is never too late to do the right thing. This will give this Congress the opportunity to do the right thing and do it in this Congress. Domestic violence prevention has always been an area where Democrats and Republicans have worked together. It's disappointing that we still have not sent a bill to the President's desk to be signed when we could have passed a bipartisan Senate bill last year. But Democrats will continue to urge the Republican House leadership to work with us to pass a bill that protects all victims of domestic violence and does more to prevent those crimes. This is not just a woman's issue. This is not just a man's issue or a children's issue. This is an issue of safety. This is an issue of security. This is an issue of health. This is an issue of family solidarity and security. This issue transcends any of the distinctions that are very important, but the common interest that we have in passing this bill is overwhelming. As a co-sponsor of the original Violence Against Women Act in 1994, and as a father of 3 daughters, the grandfather of 2 granddaughters, and the great-grandfather of a granddaughter, great-granddaughter. I hope to survive in time to vote for this. This bill is therefore personal for me, but personal for every American. Let's get it done without delay. Unfortunately, we did pass a bill through the Senate. The problem with that bill, it excluded people. In the House. We excluded people from its coverage and its protection. I can't believe that there is any House member who's going to get up and say there is somebody who lives in America that I do not believe ought to be protected from domestic violence. Let us hope that's not the case. Let's pass this bill. Gwen Moore, John Conyers, thank you. Madam Leader, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your leadership, your passion, your courage to get this bill done. Thank you very much.
Our distinguished ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, who has been fighting this fight and leading the charge for decades as well, Mr. Conyers.
Thank you so much, Madam Leader, and to our distinguished whip. Before our beloved Gwen Moore got to Congress, Steny Hoyer and I were introducing the Violence Against Women Act. It's gone through a number of iterations, and we now have the real version improved over the Senate, in which hundreds of groups participated. Law enforcement officers, advocates, survivors of this horrible kind of cruelty. And so I am so proud that Gwen Moore is now with us to get this across the line. I must point out that I am optimistic enough, Madam Leader, to think that we'll get Republican support on this bill. And with that spirit, I am proud to stand with all of you ladies and a couple of guys.
Congresswoman Moore?
Just let me say what a privilege it is to be standing here with Leader Pelosi and Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer and John Conyers, the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, and Louise Slaughter, and even Donna Edwards here, who was the first executive director of the National Network to End Domestic Violence. I just want to thank them for being here in 1994 when this was passed, because I was one of the people who was kind of out there getting beat up and sexually assaulted, and who's one of those faceless, nameless women who really needed advocates and law enforcement and people on the other end of a telephone to be there. And I am so proud to be here today. I am so pleased to say that not only do we have 158 sponsors here in the House, but in the Senate, this bill has been reintroduced by Senators Leahy and Crapo, who've championed this in the Senate, and they've introduced it along with the 3 Republican women senators, Murkowski, Ayotte, Collins, and others. And so I, too, share the optimism that we're going to be able to get this over the line with bipartisan support. This is our call to action, our clarion call to action to the House GOP leadership, to make it crystal clear that we're ready and prepared to make this a priority. The leader has set aside her very precious first bill number for the Violence Against Women Act to show and to demonstrate that this is our highest priority. We're here on behalf of victims, survivors of abuse and assault, those people who sit there and answer the calls, legal services, people who run shelters, people who see the children that need help in order to be able to not become batterers or victims themselves. Law enforcement, who doesn't know how to reauthorize this. I mean, this program, just like every other program, has taken cuts, and we have tried to reorder things and combine things so that we can get the efficiencies out of the program. We're trying to put a greater focus on sexual assault. But, you know, it doesn't matter that these are quality programs. It doesn't matter what the quantity of programs is if everybody doesn't have access to the program. And as the ranking member Conyers has said, you know, access is what it's about. As Steny Hoyer has said, who is it out there that we don't want to serve? I'm so proud to look at my colleagues and to realize that we have, you know, every race, every creed, every color here. We have, you know, representatives of the women's community here to represent every woman in America. And we are praying that this is just the beginning of a short journey toward reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act. I'm so pleased to be here with Louise Slaughter. Louise Slaughter was the first author, I believe, of the Violence Against Women Act here in the House in 1994. And I am so pleased to be sharing this podium with her today and would ask her to join us and make a comment.
Thank you so much.
We're Kane sisters.
Beautiful. First, I want to say that it's a lot different here this morning than it was in 1994. First, we have the Madam Leader, for which we're extremely proud, and a lot more good women here, as well as the men who stood with us all the way through. In 1994, I'd been here just a little while, but I had a pretty good grounding in criminal justice in both the New York State Legislature and Monroe County Legislature in Rochester, New York. And domestic violence had been an issue that I knew very little about, but was extremely troubled by. And the great former Congresswoman, Pat Schroeder, and I worked about a year and a half to get it done. We knew some things that research in those days told us, that in most cases they had found that abusers were persons who had been abused in their life or had grown up in a house where abuse was common. We didn't quite recognize that connection there, and I had a young woman when I was working on the bill here in Congress whose father died when she was young, and she was married. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. And her husband abused her, and she didn't know that that was not normal. I know that won't sound right to you today with what we all know today and everything we are schooled in, but that was not that uncommon. But we knew we had to break that cycle of violence or we'd never be able to deal with this problem. So that was a large part of what we wanted to do with the bill. In addition, we spent a lot of time and a lot of years have gone by training law enforcement, from the police on the street to the district attorneys to the judges, everybody involved, to know how serious this was. And we made it absolutely, the first time we could absolutely talk about it was that what the police had to do was separate both the abuser and the abused, that this was not a matter of going in and trying to break up a fight, going away, and leaving it to go on behind closed doors. This was one of the greatest steps, I think, that we have taken in criminal justice and to protect the people who were weak and vulnerable in the household. So we have reduced the numbers now, as you know, 61%. All of this has worked together to do this. And I'll tell you, though, this past election, I met 3 young women in my district that I'd never talked to about this before. And it's one thing when we all talk about the work we put into it, the research we put into it, 50% of this in Section A4 and all the rest of it. But when you talk to a young woman who says that when I was 17, I left home with a soldier who took me to Colorado and beat me to a pulp, and the Army would not help me, and your office brought me back, and had my face put back together. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why we're here. That is what happens with the legislation that we pass. That may be what will happen if we don't get this legislation renewed. We must not wait. It should never have come to this point, ever. If we have to put it on suspension, whatever we have to do, people are waiting out there for us to continue what we have done since 1994 until we don't see this anymore. So I'm delighted with action here this morning, and I know that we're going to get it done when Gwen gets things done. So we'll get it done, but thank you all very much for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, Congresswoman Slaughter. Yeah, Gwen Moore, she doesn't take no for an answer, as we know. Listening to Louise reminds me of what was happening in the 90s when we passed this bill. Marcy Kaptur, Rosa DeLauro, Nita Lowe, we all had to work on the funding on the Appropriations Committee that was the next step, and that again had its challenges, but we ended up having some bipartisan support for that, and that was good. And then there were other issues that related to testing the income of the abuser for women who needed legal assistance. And when they'd go for legal assistance, they'd say, well, you don't qualify because your household income is including the income of the abuser. I mean, so there were many hurdles, and the example of when Louise talks about individuals and you talk about individuals, we learned so much from those. And frankly, for some of us, it was an education that was required because none of us had that experience in our own families, neighborhoods, churches, and the rest. Maybe it was there, probably it was, and we just didn't know it. But it was like, who would do that? Who would hit somebody? But they did. And this bill has to pass. So thank you all very much for being.
Can I say one more thing? Because I want to thank you for this. Because
say it in the microphone.
As far as I'm concerned, we have the health care bill because of Leader Pelosi. And up until the time that bill was passed, 8 states and the District of Columbia considered domestic violence to be a pre-existing condition.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that? And if you had been beaten up before, you could not get insurance because you would get beaten up again. So, we can talk about decades